Welcome, everyone. My name is Tammy Glass. I am an associate professor here at the School of Architecture and also the Interior Design Program Director. I'm really honored to introduce Primo Orpilla today, who joins us from San Francisco. As many of you already know, he's the co-founder of Studio O+A, together with his partner Verda Alexander, who is unfortunately not with us today. But what began as a small two-person firm in the early 90s has evolved into a full-service design firm, which I love that it also includes graphics and branding as part of their offering. And that today they've really become known as one of the foremost innovators in workplace design. They made their start in the Silicon Valley, which led to a very impressive client list, including Facebook, Microsoft, Yelp, and Uber, just to name a few. And then another thing that I find really fascinating about Primo is that he began as an engineering student and then changed his major to interior design. And over the last couple of decades as a practicing interior designer, he has really become an outstanding role model for the industry and an advocate for us as interior designers. So since then, since getting his early start, Primo and Verda have been nominated as Contract Magazine's Designers of the Year in 2011. I feel like that sort of kicked off a whole stream of activity. They were inducted into the Interior Design Magazine's Hall of Fame, which is a pretty phenomenal honor. And their firm also won the Cooper Hewitt Design Award for interior design last year. So more recently, they've moved into the realm of product design for several major furniture manufacturers. And they have just returned from Milan, where they were asked to design and install an exhibit under the theme of a joyful sense of work. And we're going to get to see some of the first images and possibly a video hot off the press. And then lastly, I should note that Primo is currently the national president-elect for IIDA, which is the International Interior Design Association. And in honor of his position, the local IIDA community, along with our student-led group, Ampersand, has organized a reception, which will be immediately following outside in the courtyard if it's not raining, under the loggia if it is, and we will have refreshments and drinks and get a chance to talk with Primo informally. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to you.
Okay.
And give you that.
Thank you. Thanks, Tammy. I think I met Tammy, how many years ago? 3 or 4 years ago?
4 years.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys for inviting me here. This is truly an honor to come and talk about our practice and some of the strategies that we've developed over the years. O+A is 25 years old this year. So we started in '91, myself and my dog, and then Verda came on and she went to grad school. So it was a very small practice. And before then, I worked 6 years in the Silicon Valley, really just doing mostly facilities and space planning, and then doing interiors. At that time, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't have Google. The Googleplex hadn't even been thought of when I started my career. The Silicon Valley was largely manufacturing companies. So we worked, it was unique because actually the whole idea of getting these more, what I would say, more of a collective type workplace as opposed to like very linear cubicle farms, which was the Valley. Verda and I had already tried to start doing some, what we called back then, alternative officing, which means we were trying to lower panels, we were trying to make the spaces more democratic, and actually trying to humanize the environment. So I think a lot of what has come out of it today is that we really know, we know that people spend a lot of time there, and we know that we want to make those moments as compelling and as inspirational as possible. And I think one of the things that Workplace has been able to do, especially coming from our territories, that we've made that a reality, because these companies nowadays, the work environment is so important for morale. It's so important to get everybody on the same page. We know that open plan has more communication, more of these hopefully serendipitous moments so people can innovate and have creative conversations. We no longer think of these things like basically it was very linear before. Information kind of flowed through a very managerial type process where an idea was collected and was worked on. You went to a meeting, they picked the best idea, and maybe 6 months later you'd have an idea and then it wouldn't get killed. Nowadays, the Valley wants lots of ideas from everybody, and everybody can contribute. So in a lot of ways, we've tried to, through design and through space planning and kind of strategically developing space, we can flatten organizations. We kind of change the tone. We can make it less hierarchical and more about everybody being part of this large community as opposed to just a cog in the machine. And what we're trying to do is really promote that across other industries. We're not doing it so solely tech anymore. We work for the apparel companies. We work for banks. We work for the hospitality industry. So, and obviously professional services. So banks and banking and accounting and law firms are now trying to embrace this new way of work. So what I want to do is give you a little context of how the Valley started it out and how we actually began creating O+A's workplace topology. The workplace topology or workplace evolved presentation is some 70 slides, so I'm going to go through them really quick. But really what you want to focus on are the headings. The headings of each section will kind of describe a different workplace topology that over our 25-year career we've developed 10, and there's probably another 50 more, but these 10 are easy to remember, and just think of these kind of being hybrids for certain types of customers because we will customize them. So the first slide just shows you, articles lately are really, every magazine, every business journal talks about the workplace, and this is probably a Harvard Business Review from probably 2 years ago, and it really is talking about the Google workplace and how, because the cubes went away and people lost their privacy, there's been a lot of articles about the fact that it may be counterproductive, it may not work necessarily, so why we hate our offices. And it's kind of funny because if you don't really know what the office is, it's really hard to picture whether it had enough spaces and ancillary spaces and places for people to meet. And that's why when I say you read this, you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt because you don't know how the space was composed. You don't necessarily know what the strategy was behind when this design was done. So this, again, we're just kind of making a point here that the workplace is important. If this is an article, I think, from the Atlantic. If you're a Google staffer and your name is not Sergey Brin, odds are work is nicer than your home. And that is true. Nowadays, we are really striving to make these environments as nice as your favorite hotel, as comfortable and as warm as your favorite restaurant. We want there to be destination. We want people to come to work and enjoy that experience as opposed to, I'm watching the clock at 5, I'm out of here. We know people don't do that anyway, so let's make those kind of hours after work count. So we do create a lot of social environments. A lot of areas the cafeterias tend to look like restaurants. We have happy time spaces, happy time hour spaces that do look like bars. And that's because we know people are going to spend a lot of time there. The whole balance of workplace is really, work-life balance is really blurred, and we know that. So we're just trying to give another option. So if you're going to spend that time, let's make it count. So here are sort of 3 people that have, in their own way, have changed workplace in the West Coast for a lot of different reasons. But we show Steve Jobs for the Pixar facility. How many are familiar with the Pixar facility? It's kind of known for obviously the great films, but he solved through this area here, the atrium, he solved a problem that they were having with developers and animators and engineers not being able to work with each other. They scheduled all kinds of meetings and they were trying to solve something for, I think it was for the animation Cars, but the story is that no one would communicate, no one would actually solve the problem, they just have meetings after meetings after meetings. So the atrium is a really good example of a place where it's very easy to go to lunch or to have a meal, and you're not going there with the idea of talking about work, but you're actually going there to relax. And we know from our our workspace is that the most productive conversations happen in these living room type setting, happen in less in the conference room setting and more of these casual settings. So this town hall is someplace that they're going to break bread with somebody 3 times a day, and hopefully they're going to meet that engineer, and they did. What ended up happening is they were able to solve the problem over lunch as opposed to having it at a conference and kind of at a meeting. And we try to do this all over the place now in the facility. We only usually have one atrium or one food or what we call town hall. This is usually, and Steve Jobs is directly related to that one. Marissa Mayer, who's no longer the CEO of Yahoo, a few years back, one of the big things she did when she took over Yahoo, and she's from Google in the past, was that she took away the work from home. And work from home was a big thing for Yahoo at the time, but she realized in order to kind of turn around an organization, you need to have an office, you need to have a headquarters, you need to have a place where people can meet at least 2, 3, 4 times a week, hopefully, if not more, because that's kind of where conversations are had, and it's less about IMing and emailing, it's more about personal conversations. And we try in the workplace today is to have many of those moments as opposed to opportunities where they can't do it. So we kind of pull technology out of spaces. We purposely make areas sort of devoid of technology, but we do know that the workplace is going to have it. And if we can kind of take a note that workplace is important, and she brought the Yahoo people back. Unfortunately, she's no longer the CEO of Yahoo, and that thing spun out of control. So no matter what she did, it does. But it was a good example at the time. And then Mark Zuckerberg, this is actually the headquarters we did for them, and this was the first headquarters. They actually had moved from eight or so suites in downtown Palo Alto, and this was their first headquarters where all the engineers, all the developers, all the employees of Facebook were going to live for the first time. And they took an old building, and it's kind of in the Silicon Valley. It was during a time of the recession. It was about 2010, 2009. The economy wasn't doing that well, and they basically made a choice that they were not going to overbuild. The Googleplex had been done 2 years before that. Facebook decided we're not going to spend a whole lot of money. We're going to make it look. We're going to actually keep some of the character of the building, and we want that to be a part of the story. We want to know what was here, and it was the old HP facility, and they love the fact that HP at that time, when this facility was done, was a lab, and it was about experimentation. So that story is, if you go to the Facebook facility today, they tell that story all the time, because it's a cultural touchstone. It's something that's important about their culture that separates them from the other companies. And this is a big thing in tech today, or in companies today, is like understanding what that company's about, because now, when you go look for a job, a lot of folks will they want to get behind the company, and they want to understand what they stand for. And you can do a lot through the interiors. That environment conveys many more messages than any sort of inspirational poster on the wall, any sort of company mottos. The way you set up the environment, the way you tell the story about your company and culture can be completely conveyed in the built environment. And designers today are kind of in control of that. And that's what we try to show, that space matters. It has meaning. People respond to well-designed spaces. So before we get into the 10 topologies, these are 3 very typical topologies that have been used for the last 3 decades or so. So we have hard wall office, we have a cubicle, and we have a conference room. These were 3 main rooms that most every developer, every company planned with, and they just would do lots of hard wall offices if they needed private meetings, and they do cubicles, as many as they could jam pack into a space, and then conference rooms, as few as them they could do. Back in the day, we would have less conferencing space and create more space for the workforce. That way they can control the number of meetings and can control people. Nowadays, we try to have more of the meeting space, and we have these in-between spaces. So these are 3 basic methods of planning space from like the 50s on. And here's a good example of a project that we actually took on with Microsoft. And this is an 80s building. So it's really hard wall office intense. And the point of it is that the only way they're going to get people to go to Redmond was they were going to give them a private office. So they kind of sold it on the fact that you got a private office, you come here. But what it ended up doing 30 years from, well, at the time it was probably a good way to recruit. But now you can't work that way. In fact, it was kind of working against them. They weren't able to get people to kind of meet and socialize and actually collaborate. So this is a good example of taking an 80s building, and we're going to see how we begin editing back so we make it more of a collaborative workspace. So real quickly, we're trying to open up the middle, and we're taking a lot of the hardwall offices off the perimeter, so we're immediately democratizing the space. We're sharing the light. We're giving the best views to everybody as opposed to people in the hardwall office, and we're opening up circulation in the middle. The idea is that they're mixing and you're actually hopefully meeting in these moments in between. So we make them big public spaces. We do have hardwall offices because sometimes coders need private spaces to work, so we do have them, but we don't have them that you can just like camp out there. You book them for the day or a week, but they're not something that you're typically going to stay in for a year. A lot of it is based on the open plan and all these different hybrid spaces. So in this plan, there's actually the 10 topologies, and I'll go over them real quickly. We have individual work areas, shelters, think tanks, town hall, workshop, war room, living room, library, anywhere, studios, and all these, they have a certain, obviously, layout and style, but what they are also really trying to do is promote different types of behavior. We know that in private setting and social settings, people act differently. We want to make sure that we take advantage of the settings and the aesthetics to kind of drive these behavioral changes. So the first one we're going to look at is the living room. And if you kind of look at it, we do have this sort of, it's basically kind of tells you how the place functions. So it's more on the casual side, tends to be flexible. It's more of a collective type engagement and ideas to explore. And we really want these spaces to feel as casual and as comfortable as your living room at home, because we know when you're working in those types of environments and it's less formal, you tend to relax. And the idea is that this can really change your behavior. So they tend to look like living rooms. This is actually Cisco. And you're seeing actually the layers of different topologies. You're seeing shelters, you're seeing workshops, you're seeing different type spaces just in this one shop. But the living room is kind of the focus here. Living rooms can look very much like hotel lobbies. The residential and the speccing and the curation of it is really important. We don't really like to repeat details in our projects. We actually make each space kind of feel individually crafted so that you want to go there more and more. We don't like to go to restaurants that are kind of clone stamped or spaces that are clone stamped. Why would we want to do in the workplace? So it's important that these feel like they were designed. This is the lobby to Uber. Again, you're seeing many different layers of different work type settings, but again, feels not like your typical lobby. We have a lot of technology. So, and you can see from here, you can see a coffee break area, you can see big touch screens, and then the settings, even the furniture can change in the same area. But that type of design and that sort of kind of those aesthetic choices make the spaces feel special. More Uber. So the think tank is actually, think of a conference room quartered. You want it really small. 2 to 3 person meetings are very popular today. It's actually a more efficient way to break down space. If you have lots of big conference rooms and someone's just, an individual's taking a phone call in there, then it's kind of a waste of space. So we want to make sure that these spaces are available. Again, it's more of a focus type room. They tend to get used a lot for 2 and 3 person meetings, but somebody may work there alone. So they become like these individual work studios. So if you are in the open plan and you can't focus, this is what this room does for you. It actually gives you another room. This is at Nike, and you can see you can grab a laptop, close the door, and you can do focus work in there. So these are things that may be missing in that article, because what we do when we make sure we have open plan, we also make sure we have these spaces that you can take your laptop and go work privately for a while. And they all take many different shapes and forms. So individual work areas, I guess the biggest thing that most people notice is that we've lost a lot of the panels. We've lost a lot of the division between space. So they tend to be very open. We do have some, this is Yelp, there is a short divider. This is actually probably atypical. There's usually no divider anymore, but this is a great way for us to put in technology. This is actually our office in San Francisco, and there's no dividers. We actually just use the screens. You can see it's very open. This is at Uber. There's nothing in between. They have more of a free address scenario, so you can kind of work anywhere. And these are some examples of what the workplace might look like kind of 5-10 years out. We think that in this experiment, actually this is a furniture line we designed for Kimball, and it is the idea that we just need a place to perch for a little while or kind of sit down, almost like a lounge type setting. It's all sit to stand. And this is actually a space that we did in South Carolina where all we did, we curated a space for a month, and we made these little boxes. And these boxes were put together with a rubber band and actually almost like this macrame element that held it together. And once a week, we changed the user. So we went from an urban planner, a taxidermist, a graphic designer, and an architect. And the idea was that let's see what happens when we give this space to somebody and they have no plans, and what will they do with it. And what it showed is like every user created their own space. So given the ability, we will customize our environments to kind of make it work for us, and we like to personalize our space. So you can kind of, if I showed you a couple of other photos, which you'll see every configuration changed with just these units of furniture. We still have hard wall offices. This is actually what we got Microsoft to switch to. It's a 6x8 office. It's very small, but it has enough for a 30x60 desk, backup space, whiteboard, corkboard, and a side chair, and it's sit to stand. So you don't need a 12x15 office to do your business. If you need heads down work or you need private space, you can do it certainly in here, and it affords you enough room, enough work surface to do what you need to do. So this is actually one of the lines of furniture we designed for Kimball. So this is kind of workplace of the future. We're thinking that everything needs to be sit to stand. Everything needs to be malleable, that you can change it to a conference room. You can actually change the different height dividers for less and more privacy. And you can have conferencing. So it's kind of one unit will handle many different work type settings or work type postures. So studios, we think of studios as being like the office, like a workplace studio and a design firm. They tend to be more open, more collaborative, and they have usually high tables. They don't have to, you can see this one's low, but they tend to be very impromptu meeting spaces is what we find. People will sit at these, do a 10-minute, 30-minute meeting, and they'll disband. But it feels very kind of on the fly, and you kind of want it that way. You don't want somebody camping out here for 3 hours. I mean, sometimes, like, I actually go work in my town hall area, and we have one of these tables, and I kind of stand there because I like to. But these are kind of made, they're supposed to be non-bookable and available to everybody, and they're usually off corridors. They can be concrete. They can change heights. So the workshop, we like to think of the workshop as more of the analog space, and this is actually a space that we don't want people to be really doing a lot of coding or computer. We want people to actually kind of take a respite from their day and do something with their hands, or do something mechanical, or with a game, or read a magazine, or a bike shop. This is at Microsoft. We actually put a bike shop in the lobby. We branded the bikes. People brought their bikes here, rode them out, hung them. They actually tried to take this away from the building, and everybody got really angry, and they brought the bike area back into the building. Music. Usually there's tools. Usually they're very analog and less about computers and more about like doing something to exercise another part of your brain, or playing poker. This one actually, these guys love poker so much, we said, okay, let's make a room that can convert easily back and forth, and they like to play poker every Friday night in it. So town hall is that big meeting space, or that big all-hand space. We really find they almost kind of tell what the company's about without you saying anything. So we typically move these very close to the lobby. A lot of companies like to show their town hall because it really is a good example of what their culture is like. So they tend to, they look kind of restaurant-like. They look very open. We know that, when you come to someone's house, the kitchen is sort of like that place where family hangs out together. So these become very important part in the design, the town hall. Some are more elevated. This is an Uber. Almost feels like a bar. I'm getting to one that looks just like a bar, but this looks kind of like a bar. These lounges are pretty nice. This is at Nike. You've got You know, in Oregon, you have great weather, sometimes actually, but this is actually one of the sunny days in Portland. More Nike. This is a bar. I mean, technically, this was in the basement of this company's office, and they love whiskeys and they love working at happy hour. I think their favorite time was to kind of work during the 4 to 7 o'clock period. So they actually, so it's all Wi-Fi, it's got power, but then it's got like 7 brands of whiskey, so you can have whatever you want. But all that stuff is made so you can push your technology, just chargers, and it really is a workspace. It's just the way they choose to work. And who are we to say? If that's where you get your work done and that's where you kind of like to hang out with people, then we're going to let people do that. So the library, we think of the library as really being in the open plan. If you don't have any protocols, you do have chaos. And so we do set protocols up. In the library, that is kind of set aside. You know, you don't make a lot of noise in the library. So the idea is when we label it library, you're not going to have boisterous kind of conversations there. You're going to work quietly. You can work in a group. You can have a lot of people in there. But the idea is that the protocol is you don't work in kind of a noisy fashion that disturbs everybody. So libraries are quite popular because if you don't have any controls on these things, they do just become big social settings, and you can take that to town hall. That's where the noise in that activity is supposed to happen. When you have raised floor, you have opportunities to actually sync these libraries and make them feel a little bit more dramatic. Obviously, they have to be ADA accessible. And then you can make it feel like a library, even though really the only bookshelf is the one in the middle. The rest are all pictures of books from, I think, a library in London. And actually, these guys went to Oxford, so they wanted to kind of recreate their Oxford library in a small little basement of a building in San Francisco. So shelters are in between living rooms and conference rooms. We feel, and these have become very popular. You've probably seen them in a lot of magazines. There's these boxes that show up on the job site, and they have usually furnishing in them. And I think we did one of these probably some 9 years ago, and now they are super popular. This company actually had a yurt in their office, and we couldn't bring the yurt back because it wasn't flame spread rated, so we had to build our own yurt out of dry kiln wood and Class A materials. And there's actually various levels of opening, so this is the more open one, and you see the opening closing there a little bit. They don't have to be made out of dry kiln wool. They could be drywall. You just, we find that these are very popular. People like going in and out of them. They're easy to access. They're not typically booked. And you're just, again, it's almost like the studio setting on the fly. If you want to go sit down and work, these things are all set up. They do tend to have a great acoustical quality to them. We do tend to line them. This was square. It's all lined with felt, and it has a light in it. We didn't do the second square, but actually they kept this topology, and they do it all the time. The shelters become very, very popular in the valley. Now we're doing all different types of shelters. These are one of our early ones. You guys familiar with like the truck dock material that you see at like Home Depot? We just took the flaps and we put a metal rail up and brought it down on threaded rod. This one on the right is actually interesting because this is Capital One. And this bank executive briefing area, they really wanted to teach the executives that were flying from Virginia in their very formal office space to think more outside the box and do design thinking. So we actually partnered with Stanford University and their design department, and we employed a lot of the design thinking processes into the space. And one of them was this perch. You know, if I get out of my normal setting, I go sit up here. It's again about time to make people think and work a little differently. This is Yelp. Just to give you what this was, we actually were dividing up the floors by different regions in the world. So this was a call, kind of a customer support group, sales group, and each one of them, they either called on Asia, they called on Europe, or they called on the Americas. This was based on some basically gardens, flower gardens like in Northern Europe, and it's a map of different types of gardens. So this graphic relates to that region. And those are nice things you can do when you're developing concepts, is tie a little backstory into it. Anywhere, I know it sounds stupid, but anywhere is really, we want to make sure that the campus is almost any place that you decide to jot down or have a moment to talk with somebody, we want to make sure that it's useful. So we do try to leverage every inch. Real estate's very expensive, especially in the Bay Area. So windows, hallways, we will make them extra wide. We'll put a little acoustical material. We'll have power or data and make them, these transitory spaces, useful, because we know that you never know when you're going to have that moment. You don't want to try to find a conference or you want to be able to just jot it down. So we do quite a bit of whiteboarding, or in this case, chalkboard. But we use underneath the stairs, windows, every square inch, if there's a place that we can put something that we typically do. And they're nicely designed, so you want to go there. Yelp again, Uber, outside, we have good weather like you guys. War room, still have war rooms, still the big 13, 14, 15, 20 person conference room. Different materials, booking systems, they open typically to the public. But you can see, I mean, they're just, every single one has a different feel, has a different aim. This one's actually based on Stanley Kubrick's Dr. Strangelove, so it has that kind of gray and the atomic clock, and this is actually Uber, you know, and this is usually working all the time for Uber. So they actually have this LED glass, so when it switches on to gray, you know they're in session, and there's those sleeping pods in the back there, so this is a self-contained room. And some of them can be very, you know, this is actually on 6th Street in San Francisco. This is a VC firm. We actually kind of wanted to make it this indoor. We wanted to be able to see what was going on. So each one of these vignettes, that's their meeting space. So in closing with this presentation, the idea is that work happens everywhere. And if you're doing your job, you're trying to kind of make the most of all those spaces, make the most of all those moments. So we want to cover the whole facility or campus with that thinking, so that we're always kind of working to make these spaces work no matter where you are in the facility. So that's my first talk. How fast did I do that? Okay. 5, okay, we're doing good. We've got to speed through these next ones. We will, oh no. So the next set of slides are going to show you what we did in Salone. So we talked about the idea behind this piece was in the future in Milan, the curator of the show, Cristina Control, she basically curated this 10,000 square foot booth. It was huge. And it's been done by Jean Nouvel, it's been done by Michael DeLucchi. They've had like all these very famous, what I would say, non-workplace people design it, and it's the Workplace 3.0 exhibit. So she was actually one of the first people who actually does workplace, and she picked 4 firms from around the world to study Workplace of the Future. And we were fortunate enough to be selected to represent the West, but we had UN Studio representing kind of the northern part of Europe. We had a firm from Tehran, and we had a firm from Milan. All of us sort of thinking, what do we need in the workplace of the future? And it didn't give us a time span. We could think 30 years out, we can think 10 years, we could 5 years out. So each of us had a different solution. We deal with workplace every day, and we kind of feel like the goal for workplace is to kind of humanize, and that's what we try to do in our, and also we feel that technology will be at a very high level, the workstation will be at a very high level. The last thing you want to see is us to do another workstation or workplace setting. So we actually thought, what are we going to need? We're going to need areas to sort of recompose and recharge and actually kind of center ourselves. Because there'll be even more technology coming at you, and how can we control that? So we're really speaking about well-being, and there's a lot of talk about that today, is that how can these spaces be kind of more healthy for you? So the goal here for us was, let's explore what those spaces might be like. So you saw our 10 topologies. These space types are almost kind of responding to our topologies idea that in the workplace you're going to have places to go that you don't want to work, that you don't want to quite take a nap, but you want to get some sort of sense and kind of rebalance yourself. So we're thinking before or after a meeting, maybe there's a space that you can go. So we explored also, we kind of used water as our theme, and the changing of states of water, so from a liquid, to a gas or to kind of a frozen. All these transitory states are moments that when you're kind of having your roughest of days, and that like transitory moment where you go take a walk or you take a break from it, that's the moment where actually you unstuck or you're kind of refreshed again. And if we can figure out ways to do that with the space, we thought that'd be very helpful. And we also thought there'd be some interesting rituals and prosthetic devices. So we developed a whole line of office prosthetic devices to help you get there. And part of it, you're going to see that it was ritual. It was the putting on of these devices that started to change your state of mind. So we're trying to connect that ritual and that putting on the device and then going to the space. So once you did it, you kind of forgot about what was hanging you up. The goal was to make you forget for just that split second. And we actually watched people do it, and it was kind of amazing. People would just stare and go, wow, and they had a rough day. They're walking through this. Salone is huge. 340,000 people come to Salone. It was probably as stressful as going to work. They would come and just hang out in some of these rooms just to relax. So these are some concepts: conservation, adaptable, grounding, nourishing. These were just like big ideas we had at the beginning. We culled them down to a couple of things, but we felt we needed these environments that kind of were wearables, and also the space would change, and you've got a Terrell. You've got a lot of these are art installations, so I'd say the space tended more towards the arts installation, but we know that a Terrell or Oliver Eliasson are very kind of transforming when you go into those spaces, so we took on some of those qualities. So this is the stand. Those are the 4 booths. Kind of gives you a sense of the scale. It's a big area. And then these were the things we landed on. And this is a little early on bubble dry. I'm going to kind of show you the thought process. We came up with attend, hike, hunker, and repose. And those are the postures: stand, move, sit, lie. And we felt like these are almost like going through, if you're going through a forest or you're going in nature, these are kind of things that you might be doing. So we did take a lot from the sort of the hike or the walk through a natural setting. We're also trying to figure out how these space types might work. Is there going to be an overhang? Is it going to be something that makes you crunch down to get into? Again, we know that when you change posture and you start doing these things, you actually forget about what's around you and you kind of focus on the task at hand. So we're actually forcing you to take on these postures and think about something else as you're doing this, and then by the time you get there, hopefully your mind is unstuck and you're relieved, or the pressure's gone, or some way we've transitioned you out of that state. We looked at some artists and some really cool pieces in developing we call it the survivalist kit. So like surviving in the workplace of the future, you had to like grab one of these devices and kind of go into the workforce. So it was a little bit of like zombie apocalypse. We were trying to like make it fun, but it actually ended up working really well because people do work, and they work in these very stressful settings, and there's not often a place to go, especially if you're in San Francisco or in an urban environment. You don't get to go out the building as much as you are on a campus, so we needed to create these environments inside the space. So you kind of see us starting to sculpt the space. We don't do a lot of models, but we made one for this. We usually do everything in 3D Studio Max or Revit, but this was fun to do. And then we're working with the planes. Initially, we knew we needed to have some overhead space, and this is a huge 2-story warehouse that we had to drop these clouds into and create this lower sense in these little space types. Plan. This is our final breakdown of how it would work. Kind of enter at the front. We had a demo to the right, and we had a demo to the left, and then 2 big demos towards the end. So that's where they repose, hunker, attend, and some elevations just to give you a sense of the scale and height. It's all in metrics because it was all built in Italy. This didn't get built, but I love this picture. we were trying to, water was, we know that you kind of rally about companies kind of with their mottos and aspirational things from the company side. We decided that in the future, companies will have their models, and there will be these great things about the company, but we're going to make the experience about how can, like, if there's famine in the world, or if there's like, we know that water will be scarce. In California, water is always scarce, so it's like hits home to us. So we thought we'd rally around water. So everything here in the liquid and the water, we decided to call it the water cooler, because it also has gathering around the water cooler, this nuanced and more relaxed conversation around water and the scarcity of water. So this is what it looked like. Actually, it was a pretty cool exhibit that was designed by Christine. We all had these really almost like bubble wrap containers, and you can read a little bit, but you couldn't see very far in. You had to actually enter the exhibit. This is it from afar. This is the entrance into our space, and this was 2 weeks ago. As you come in, you get to kind of see, we have a little bit of a descriptor, we have a map, and you're slowly starting to see the prosthetic devices. So we had 3 devices. One was a stool. They were all kind of wearables. This stool you actually had to put together, so it came unassembled, and I'll show you pictures of that. We had a jacket that actually helped you in repose, and it has a pillow built into it, and the pillow is shaped like a big, gigantic elephant ear. So the sound kind of goes right into your ear, and it folds right back down. So again, but when you start putting it on, that's the beginning of the piece. It would start when you started building or you start putting on the piece. This is actually kind of an interesting, this is for hike, and we made this, it's like a vest. And it had like this wood tablet that comes out, and you can kind of put your device there, and you can pull your laptop. And we put the pocket in the back, but we put it so you can't reach it. And that was because you had to ask somebody to grab your laptop. And so it becomes a social engagement. So fun little things like that kind of made it like, okay, this is the workplace of the future. I want to talk to somebody, not text them, and they have to help me. I have to go ask for their help. So again, we know from workplace today that it's really easy not to talk to anybody. It's really easy to like be in a meeting and everybody's staring down at their device and not talking. So we're trying to challenge that with these prosthetic devices. And they had to be, obviously, in San Francisco, we tried to make it cool and hip and found some great fabricators and artists. So we commissioned artists in San Francisco who had really, really great materials that we could pull from. This was a sail-making company. They made the jackets. They made all these devices. And then those are the stools. So this is actually, when you're in it, this piece, and I'll show you the video, was beaming down into a pond. And it was bright blue, and it was shimmering. And when you see the video, it felt like there was water in there. And the lights are much lower. So the light quality is very dark, and all of a sudden you just see this thing shimmering. And we commissioned an artist, and it's this person swimming in a pool, and you see it's almost like from above and below. You could just stare at it for hours. And in 2 or 3 minutes, you forgot where you were. And that's how effective it was. So you'd see lots of people hanging out there. The second piece was repose. You can kind of see there's benches back there. Sorry. You can kind of see there's these benches that you lay back on, but you kind of sit there, and it's on angle with the screen, and you don't really see this projection unless you're inside. So from the outside, you don't see it, but we took a shot where you could see it. And you just watch another video, cloud changes, gases, rain, and there's a soundtrack. So all of this has sound as well. This is what that piece looked like from the entry. This is a little bit of the video, and it was just mesmerizing. You just sit there and stare and watch this person swimming in this pool. It was quite hypnotic. And there's one of the changes. Someone trying on the jacket. We forced people to wear the jacket if they came in. If they wanted to get a little badge, we made these little badges, like the Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts. So if you did one of the postures, you got a badge. You had to. If you collected 4, you were like really good, and you stayed in there for 30 minutes. It was great. Water. This is what the video kind of looked like from below. And you'd find like 20 people in here, and like 2 of them would be asleep. But they would just watch this video, and the sound, when it started raining, it felt like you were under like in an understory of a forest. It was really, we were trying to make it very low tech, so video is about as far as we wanted to go. There's a couple of different settings. We had this great nature scene from Portland with this fog coming in over through these redwoods. There's what that's what the ears look like, and the vest. And it was like getting a half sleeping bag. And it kind of people were like, "Oh, this is cool." And then actually, we didn't even intend to do this, but we left a couple of notepads out there, and people would just leave comments. And we didn't. There was no instructions, but I think they found it. It does work. It was transformative in a way that, they go in going, "Oh, what is this stuff?" And then they come out like, "Oh, wow, I feel pretty chill." Yeah, here's some. This shows you how they work. That's Courtney, one of the designers on the project. It doesn't have to be for laptop too. You can write in it. You can put your moleskin. This is the way this worked. You wore it around, and you had to build it. And it snaps, kind of a friction fit piece, and it got a little blanket. And we did do something with Microsoft. So this actually had a beautiful water crystals and water kind of rising. So when you put this HoloLens piece on, out of the center, it would rise up into a cloud above you. Of course, you can't see it unless you have the HoloLens on. But it was the most tech we had, and we go, if we're going to use tech, we're going to use it kind of for good. So let's have an art piece as a part of the tech. And that's that. Let me show you the video. That's my son and my wife. Okay. Here is one of the videos. Sorry, I kind of moved it around. It's moving a little bit, but there was a soundtrack which is not on here, and I don't want you to hear what's playing now because there's people talking about why isn't the sound working. This was prior to it actually being fully automated, and then here is a little bit of the video. Is quite cool of the pond. So you can see how dark it was. So it was quite dramatic when you walked into the space, and there's a filter on top of it, and she has a full bodysuit on, but it looks like she doesn't. It was really quite hypnotic. I think there's probably one more. Yeah, this is again prior to the whole booth being done. So yeah, that's what we do in our free time when we're not doing offices. We design little exhibits. I think, I can go to another one. It's up to you. We have, unless you want to end it there, we got 10 minutes. I can show one more. What would you guys like to see? Do you want to ask? I've got one more deck, which is kind of mostly about branded environments. O+A does. We do have our own brand team. We've always liked not having to go to a third party when we do our graphics, so we integrate them. So at the right beginning of the conversation when we start developing a design. And everything you see in O+A, the wallpaper, all the details, we do that in-house. We don't typically. Yeah, let's go real quick. Okay. All right. So the last one here is pop-ups, we call it. And starting on the wrong side of it. Close your eyes for a second. Don't look at any of those. Okay. So recently we've actually started trying to do more exhibit design and showrooms, and sort of a retail reach for us. We don't typically do them, but We like them because they're fun to explore for us, because we typically, when we're doing a workplace, it's the moments are not as, we don't get to do them as much. So what's nice about a showroom or a booth is that all you're doing is try to kind of wow the visitor and try to get them to stay and linger a little bit longer. So how do we do it? You know, we've got a couple of projects here that we can kind of show you how to create these experiences. This is the Kimball showroom, and we're actually showing you our image boards and the process and the way we'd show it to a client. So we try to use image boards, and we try not to use too much. We have rules about using Pinterest. We force people to go find images in other areas, go take photographs, go to the library, go visit sites, take pictures. Don't just let the algorithm figure out what cool office is, you know. It's easy to do that, and you don't know. For me, I want you to kind of think on your own, because you're developing yourself and your own aesthetic. You're not developing mine. So kind of what I'm looking for is your thinking. So if we can, we do that, and this takes several attempts to get this right. But here in this Kimball show, and we've done 3 of them, it was a bit of a, we wanted to sort of transform you and kind of take you to another dimension. So you kind of see the mirrors kind of playing that game and focusing you, and then all of a sudden, a lot of this was meant to kind of either make an infinity effect or like elongate space. So we're trying to twist time through some of the details here. This is this is how we do the colors. We're very pragmatic about how we apply them and how they're approached. We have a font type. We have a graphic designer who's kind of looking kind of beyond message with the concept. So we look very closely at this. And we actually hear some patterning that we're beginning to explore. How can we make it, you know, how can we bend space through graphics? And actually here's like where they would end up. So you're kind of seeing kind of several different layers on a very, very, it's about a 10,000 square foot showroom. It's not that small, but we've actually also located all the product in sequenced by the designer, and all those moments are based like, for that particular designer, this is the way it goes, this is the way it goes. So we're looking how we're gonna move people through this space in this particular plan. So this is the entry, a little bit about how we applied graphics. We can go on the floor. You can get materials now that are hardy, and you can actually walk on them. So we like to run them wherever we can if we're able to. This little box here is kind of cool. So we did make a little infinity mirror. So when you looked into this box, it looks like it goes through the building and kind of through the space, and actually great from above. Some of the furniture, what we would do is we actually specify all the finishes in fabric so that we make sure that it ties into our color scheme and graphics. These are one of the little cabanas. This was actually mine because I designed the workstation to the right. I showed you that big desking system. So this was actually my little booth that spoke to me. I'm a hoarder and I collect a lot of stuff. This doesn't look anything. This looks much cleaner than like my office, but I tend to collect a lot of stuff and I like to keep it around me. So that was kind of what we were trying to say with that space, but not nearly enough junk. This is Daniel Korb. He's from Germany. He's super clean. Everything is so he has the real clean booth, very austere. And this is the line that he did. He's also designed for Vitra, very, very talented designer. This is for Pam Light, and her theme was she liked camping, she liked cabins, so we kind of made this sort of rustic cabin with the camouflage and the deer skin on the ground or the bear skin. This is actually, we did this last year I designed this product. It's a whiteboard, which actually has dividing qualities, so you can actually move it around. It has material that is actually painted on wood, so you can write on wood. But also, we developed one that actually works on a pivot, so it can go straight up and actually can go to a desk, and it locks in place, and you can kind of really lean on it. So we actually, this product launched and is actually for sale, and we designed this camper. The camper is kind of meant to be a mobile think tank or a conference room that you can pull around and bring into a warehouse. And the graphics, the theme was anywhere or boundaryless. So we right away made like a forest and a topo plan and kind of created that setting. So this was in the lobby at NeoCon last year. This is the upstairs space on the market floor. We did this at London Design Festival 2 years ago, and it was really actually to showcase O+A's work to the European market. So everybody was trying to buy things in here. There was nothing to buy. We were basically showing our work on this cube here. Actually went to this blue thing. Actually made a cube at night, and then we pulled it apart, and basically was showing how we can manipulate space by just having these two walls. So we would turn them around every once in a while or put them askew. So kind of every day of the fair, the booth looked different. You can kind of see. Here's a little bit of the pretend store. This is the boxes and the cubes. Some people bring their own sawhorse legs. This was the taxidermist. I think it's a graphic designer. And then here's some, everything we do really try to personalize the space, and custom is very big. Incrementally, the cost may seem like it's a lot, but it really isn't when you kind of think of kind of the quality of the space that you get out at the end and people notice it. So we do like to play with furniture and finishes and details a lot to personalize it. This one shows a lot of what the graphics team is capable of. And they don't just do wallpaper, they do sculptures, they design things that kind of hang from the ceiling, and wood carvings. This is at Uber, and these are all, at the taxi cab when they kind of fill out a ticket and they call up the taxi drivers, they have these billets that are left over, and we kind of made a whole sort of wall, kind of to speak kind of to the old way used to hail a cab. So these are more pop-ups. These are retail pop-ups that we've done in San Francisco, detailing. We're doing a bank rollout in Southern California, which is kind of cool. It is for newly immigrated bankers or people who've just come to Southern California. And the way they do banking is very different than most of us. You know, we're used to sticking things in ATM and signing the back. Well, they don't like to do it that way. They like to see the check, go into a box, and get a receipt for it. So it feels like the transaction's much less automated. It's more about the human touch. So it serves the Latin community. So we did have a little bit more what we felt were notes and moments that felt a little bit more, could be from Latin America, the patterning, the detailing. Sorry, it's so pixelated, I grabbed a bad file. And that's it. So if you have any questions, I have brought books, the topology books. If you ask a question, you get a book. So you can't leave without asking a question. Yeah, I know we've been doing it for a while, and I think what we're trying to do is just be very good at documenting everything, because interiors is not kind of, I feel like it's sort of, it's not always understood what we do. Everybody thinks you're picking finishes, aren't you? Or you're doing this. No, we're strategizing space. We want to humanize space. We want to make those moments meaningful. And there's a lot of ways to do it, as you can see. I think we try everything at least once. And, you know, what we do is sort of record things, but we don't tend to do things, we don't repeat details. I don't know if you noticed, we try not to. Because we want everybody's space to be kind of special to them. So like Facebook space is different than Uber space is different. Obviously we have to use the same building materials, but I think one of the reasons we did bring a branding group on is that we can kind of tweak graphics and tweak detail to make it feel special. And I think when you're working for a client, they appreciate that. If you have the opportunity to really customize it for them, you should, because it's their space. It's reflective of them, their culture, their people, and it's special. And kind of that's kind of how we approach it. So, does anybody have any questions? Want a book? I'll go back there and I'll come to the front. Yeah.
So we saw the current way you design workplaces right now with 10 types of spaces.
Yeah.
And then we also saw what you imagine the future workplace will look like.
Yeah.
Do you already see us
It needs to happen now. I think that the spaces have, I mean, there's a lot of great design out there, no doubt. I mean, it's just, to me, workplaces have transformed the last 5 years, and everybody does really good spaces. I think understanding how the culture in that community, that little ecosystem that you're designing for, it needs to be really, really sorted out, because you can do really cool designs, but if you don't have the right number of conference rooms, the metrics figured out, the spacing, the location, the adjacencies, it doesn't work. You have a great design space, but it kind of falls flat and it doesn't really serve its purpose. You really want people to really cohabitate and work well in the space. So it does take a lot more. I'm not showing any floor plans. I mean, we can go into lots of details of how many conference rooms does O+A think you need kind of per person versus another. I mean, those types of things we consider, because we know if we don't put enough of them, the space will fail. So a lot of the stuff, we think, actually what we did at Saloni, we go, why can't you have these rooms? These are great rooms to have. If I was going to prep for a meeting and I needed some downtime, I would go sit in this room for a little bit and just quiet my brain a little bit so I can go make a presentation or talk to someone. I mean, a lot of these things are just, they're almost like we need them now. Technology is catching up. Integration of all this is going to happen. We're going to have lights that time to your circadian rhythm. We're going to have temperatures adjusted. We're going to have smells. We're going to have everything kind of controlled to the point where you don't even need to think about it. Even to the point of your last presentation showing up in the conference room just because your phone signature has signaled the main computer or the cloud that you're in the room, and it will send it there. That's right around the corner. What we need are spaces that we think kind of humanize and kind of center people again. Okay. Yeah.
You seem to have almost an anthropological approach to design based on how customized your spaces are that you're designing.
Yeah.
What is your research process in this? Are you spending X amount of time in the offices working with them, or is it just sitting down in your office?
So
are you observing them? What's that process?
we actually, so before we engage, we kind of show them how long something takes. And a lot of it is that front-end investigative work where we're actually not only just sending out SurveyMonkey questionnaires, but we're actually going to the site and watching them operate for a week or two or however many days they can afford us based on schedule. But we do the observation, and we do walk around and ask a lot of questions, because we'll often get a brief from a JLL or a consulting company, and I don't think, it's not that we won't really work on information that we didn't collect. So we have to see it, because a lot of these things, they tend to be generalized, and we know that people, you know, everybody works a little differently. Engineers talking to developers to G&A. I mean, they all have different ways they like to work and different levels of privacy. And some people like noisy, loud areas for their engineers. Others like super quiet areas for their engineers. And a lot of people would say, well, how's it going to fit the next group? Well, then we'll fix it. I mean, it's not meant to be a universal fit solution. That's too long how we've been doing workspaces, and that's why they don't always function at the highest level they could. So we try to promote, like, the highest functioning offices need to have a bit of all these things, because your culture is different, and they gather information and they work differently with one another. So why wouldn't we customize it to the way they work? So yeah, we observe them. So here's a book. Yeah.
So you showed a picture of that mess at Capital One, and you showed a lot of work from Silicon Valley, but I'm wondering how many of these blue chip type companies on the East Coast are coming to you with workforces that wear suits and ties, like trying to get some of that startup energy through their interiors. Like, do you think that's always appropriate for that
Well,
company?
that's a good question, and I think a lot of them, they're naturally just coming to us because their workforce is changing. So we have 5 generations of people in the workforce today. So the boomers and the X, and we're coming out, and the millennials and the makers, they're coming in. And the way they work has forced these blue chip companies to change their environments. Some of the biggest companies in the world are going to change because they just simply can't hire anymore. It's a little bit of a retention issue, but We probably had more calls from Europe and Asia and the East Coast in the last 2 years than we ever had. O+A has largely been in the Bay Area and largely in the Silicon Valley, in like a 30-mile radius, everything in there. And now as it's become more acceptable to have open plan, everybody's looking at who's doing what. And there are a lot of practices that do it. I mean, we're not the only one. I think our approach is, I think we've really been good at chronicling and sort of recording how things work. And our case studies are like, well, people know these companies and they've heard what they're doing, so they naturally take a look at it, whether or not they gravitate towards us as the final consultant. But I do think that because there are really only a few people that have done it for, I would say, a long period of time, this alternative type workspace, we get a lot of RFPs to look at. And the latest one was from the Catalan government from Spain. It's like imagine designing a governmental office for a country that, can't elect the president or form a government. I can just imagine what those meetings are going to be like. We will not get anything done. But yeah, so we are getting a lot of requests from all over the world, which is kind of cool. I mean, the last place I thought I'd be doing this talk and actually visiting would be Stuttgart, Germany. And there's like 4 companies in Germany that we need to change our workplace, because they have different, I don't know if you've ever been to like a BMW plant, but it feels like, forced labor. It's very, people have break times and they have all these things, but they can move 10,000 people out of a cafeteria faster than anything I've ever seen. It's like in, you eat, and you're out. And it's like, have a coffee, you stand up, you don't even say hi. You just have the coffee and go. So we're trying to promote a different, connect with these people, and you'll have a much happier workforce. Yeah. So you can grab your book. Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about your post-occupancy research and how that filters back into your firm?
Well, a lot of the folks that we work for, they don't allow us to publish too much on that, but we do continually update spaces. So we're very good at sort of, they usually want us to kind of stay on because there's usually some tweaking. But the sort of gathering the data and sort of using it as a white report or pink, we haven't been able to, we just know that, we'll hear that people don't want to move out of that area. We'll hear that people just, it's been successful. So some companies you just can kind of tell because they want you to do more and more. And that's one of the ways we can tell that some of the things that we're doing is working. I wish it was pure science and we could do that, but it's like no one wants to share that information. It's almost like we don't want to tell everybody how this thing works. It works. Or, but we should have more reporting on it. It's easier to get it out information early on. It's hard to get it on the post side unless they use it internally, and that's what they typically do. They use it internally to design their future spaces.
Oh, everybody wants to talk.
Yeah.
Should we do one more and then transition to the
Yeah, sure.
reception?
Okay.
I wanted to hear a little bit more about your decision to start your own firm. At that pivot point in your...
Good question. I actually was going to go back to school for architecture. And the schools I wanted to go were like 2 very, very weird schools like SciArc and Cooper Union, because I wanted to do like experiment. I mean, I was into all those LA architects that were doing cool things. So I wanted to go, actually SciArc's where I wanted to go. It just so happened my wife decided to go and we both couldn't afford to go to school. So somebody had to, I said, okay, well you go and I'll follow you in 2 years, but I'll just do this thing with this. I'll just start an office just see if it works. And that was 25 years ago. So it was kind of interesting because I felt, could I sell my own services? I'm used to selling another because I was actually okay at doing that for this other guy I work for. It just turned out, I guess, and Verda and I were kind of, we wanted to do something in the field and we were probably going to have a hard time doing it from another practice. So we had always been proponents of alternative officing. We'd seen a lot of interesting things. And my wife actually is an artist. She has a master's in environmental design, but she's also got an MFA. So I think that does a lot to influence the way we work. We tend to not, we don't let kind of the design, design can be dangerous too. You have to like get resources from outside of design, because it can be very insular and it can be very cutesy design, a very cool design. But we actually probably gain more out of going to an art exhibit or hearing some talk on something as far away from design as possible. And I think that's what we want to do. At O plus A, you get a stipend for every year. You go spend it on, hopefully, a weaving class, a butcher. We want you to use it to kind of better yourself as a person. We know you're going to do good design. We know you're going to work really hard, but we know that actually makes a more well-rounded designer for us, those things.
Where
Okay.
should they send their resumes?
Well, the office in San Francisco has openings and it has internships, so we look at them pretty early on. But and we did open a small office in New York, so hopefully we gain some traction there, and we'll expand that office a little bit more. But right now, we have one location, and yeah, it's fun. Georgia knows. Some people in this audience have been there. It's a big family. It's a good group of people.
So we'll continue the conversation downstairs. If it's not raining, then it's okay. And I'm